Want to equip and disciple your people beyond Sunday? Welcome to RightNow Media, the largest library of video-driven Bible study resources used by more than 20,000 churches, schools, and organizations. With a RightNow Media subscription, everyone in your church can access thousands of biblical resources for kids, couples, small groups, and more. Give your members access to great content anytime, anywhere, on any device. Equip and inspire everyone in your church every day of the week with RightNow Media.
Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have you with us for today's webinar. We're going to be focusing on what's working right now in large churches, and I'm excited for today's conversation because I have several friends from great churches joining us. I'm going to let Shany do the official introductions, but we have J.D. Greear and Adam Starling and Eric Geiger joining us for today's conversation. Three lead pastors at very large churches, and what I know about each of these churches too, they're just not big churches, they're healthy churches, and there's something unique that's happening in each of these churches in this season, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation to kind of unpack some of what they're learning right now that's working in their churches and helping each of these churches reach more people for Jesus. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on four key areas of ministry: reach strategies, how do we reach new people, engagement strategies, once people connect to our church and connect to faith, how do we keep them engaged, multi-site strategy, and then we're going to be taking a look at staffing and structure. And joining me as a facilitator of today's conversation, I'm excited about this. Normally, Amy from our team, Amy Anderson, would be joining us, but she's on site working with a great church today, and because of that, Shany Cardenas is going to be joining us. And Shany's been on our team for a number of years. She works in our client experience area. What I love about Shany, though, is not only does she love Jesus, but she is also very invested in the life of her church, Christ Fellowship Church in Miami, where her husband is the executive pastor. So Shany, thanks for being a part of this conversation with us today.
Thanks for having me. I have big shoes to fill without Amy here, but I'm really excited. I'm excited because we have some great panelists joining us today. And as you mentioned, we have Eric here with us. Eric is married to Kay. They have two daughters, Eden and Evie, and Eric is the senior pastor of Mariners Church in California. Eric received his doctorate in leadership and church ministry from Southern Seminary, and he's authored several church leadership books, many which you probably know of, probably heard of, probably read. And fun fact, I actually know Eric over 15 years ago. He was the executive pastor here at Christ Fellowship, and he was the one that was on staff when I got hired for my first ministry role as children's director. So it's good to see you, Eric. It's good to have you on here. And our next panelist is Adam, and he's married to his wife, Christy. They have two children, Beckham and London, and he pastors at Victory Family Church in Central Oklahoma. And last but definitely not least, we have Pastor J.D. Greear. J.D. is married to Veronica. They have 4 kids, and he pastors the Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. So it's good to have you all with us today.
So with that introduction, let's just dive right in. As I mentioned up front, we're going to focus on 4 key areas of ministry strategy. One of them is reach. How do we reach people who are not currently in the church and may not be a part of the faith? And what I've seen in large churches is they are very intentional about widening the front door and inviting people to take steps towards Jesus. And Eric, I want to begin with you. Actually, the reason why I wanted you to be involved in today's conversation is I saw some crazy number, like I want to say over 1,500 people over a 12-month period recently at Mariners Church went public with their faith by getting baptized. Did I hear that right?
I think when you texted me, it was in our annual, whatever number it was in our annual report, which is for sure true. Yeah. the data team would.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Whatever, I can't remember what it was, but that was true.
Well, we're hearing from several large churches that there are many brand new people in their churches over these last few years. And I'm just wondering, it sounds like you have, but have you experienced this at Mariners Church as well? And what do you think is driving that? Why are so many new people connecting with the church?
Yep. We're definitely in a season where we are seeing God bring people to himself. And I think ministry, there's seasons where you plant, there's seasons where you water, and there's seasons where there's harvest, and God brings growth, and He's good in every one of those seasons. And the work that we do is we want to be faithful stewards for each of those seasons. And being faithful in one season, it doesn't mean that that's a better season than another season just because it can feel better because of the harvest. The reality is that the planting and the watering, those are really sacred seasons as well. But for sure, I think, like you mentioned, Tony, there's a lot of churches that are in a harvest season right now where God is bringing more people to Himself, or a church is experiencing some visible growth in terms of new people. Again, like the other growth is really important too, but that's a season that I know our church has been in, and other churches are. To answer the question though on why, I think ultimately we believe that it's the Spirit of God that does the work. But if you want to look at some things He's used, or some things that are happening in the culture that is causing that, I do think coming out of the pandemic, people had an awakening in their own life of how some of the things that they trusted in were shallow or didn't really bring fulfillment into their lives. And so there's a new curiosity, with people, that the world's also more and more confusing. And so people are longing for clarity. And I do believe that by teaching some things that have felt as if we're addressing questions that people have, that has brought people to church out of a desire for clarity in their life. I think also there's a desire that people have then they'll look in different places for power in their life. There's so many places where they're looking for some mystery or unlock some secret. And it's really similar to, I'm studying the book of Colossians right now. So it's really similar to people who lived in Colossae looking for some secret knowledge or some power. And Paul says, the longing you have for power, that's actually good, but the greatest power is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so the reality is people are looking for clarity. People are looking for power to live in a world that feels as if it hasn't satisfied. So there's a new hunger, or a more visible hunger, and the opportunity to preach Jesus and bring clarity and point people to the one who is the ultimate power has been a fun season, a fruitful season.
Adam, so do you still see the weekend services being a part of your strategy for reaching new people?
Yeah, I think definitely for us. And this is, this is Norman, Oklahoma, so I don't know what works for everybody, but for us, Sundays are still by far, it's not even close, by far the most effective way to reach new people. I heard somebody say a long time ago, the best way to grow a church is when the people that are currently in your church love your church. I know it's simple. I've just found that to be very, very true. I think if Sundays will add value to their lives, then certainly they're going to keep coming, and they're going to bring their friends. And I don't mean that in like a consumer way. I mean when value is in, and they find Jesus, they find purpose, they're able to connect with people, they're growing in God, their kids are being discipled. And I think what Eric said is so true. A lot of Sundays, I'll tell my wife before I preach, I'll say something like, man, today's the day I'm going to offend everybody, and I'm just going to preach the hard truth, and everybody's going to leave the church. And like, I'm standing in the lobby after church, and everybody's like, that was my favorite sermon ever. I just think people are so hungry for truth. They're hungry for a move of God. So I think, and I agree, after the pandemic, I think people realize that there's got to be more than this. So yeah, for us, no doubt, Sundays are still the most effective way to reach people. We do a lot of stuff throughout the year to try to get people on our campus, and those go well. It's fine, and we have people on the campus every week doing things like pickleball, just trying to make it an inviting place where people feel more comfortable. But still, not even close. Sundays are the most effective way.
So pickleball is still a big thing over there too, huh?
Huge. You guys play pickleball? I love pickleball.
Yes, everyone's playing pickleball here in Miami. Everybody wants to play pickleball and do pickleball dates. But you said that you still feel like it's the most effective way is just Sunday weekend services. And is there anything that you're doing maybe differently to reach new people?
On Sundays, no. I mean, I think for us, Like I wish I had some new great strategy, man. For us, let's help people have an encounter with God, and let's just preach God's word. And I just think, I don't have anything profound. I think, let's just introduce people to Jesus.
I actually think that's what's profound, though, is in this season, both of you have said it, people are hungry for truth. They're hungry for all that Jesus offers, forgiveness, hope, purpose for life, and especially coming out of the pandemic. I mean, that hunger is very evident in people's lives. And I'm just grateful that we're seeing so many people that they're not sure that Jesus is the answer yet in many cases, but there's some sense that they should connect with the church, that there's something that the church can offer some answers. And so it's so encouraging. Your churches are representative of dozens and dozens of other churches we've worked with in recent months that are experiencing that same thing. And JD, beyond weekend services, where are you seeing results when it comes to reaching new people, helping new people take their next steps towards faith in church?
Well, if biblically it's true that God does some of his best work in the church in unfortunate times, Acts 7 and 8, he scattered the church and through persecution. I think when the farther we get away from COVID in that season, realizing that it was on the whole a pretty negative season for us, there were two things that he did in our church that I've heard from other pastors were pretty consistent. Digital and discipleship. Digital is, our church had a robust web presence. It wasn't like it was new, but I think learning to make that something that was the forward foot in how we engage with people, realizing that many people are going to engage with us digitally a long time before they ever come to visit. I'm not the kind who feels okay with people just doing everything digitally. I do think church is an incarnational experience, but I just know that the way people are now, whether we're talking about shopping or television shows or even church, they're going to the first kind of like putting stuff out there is digitally. And so it forced us to get a lot better at that, at the delivery, at the follow-up, at the, just knowing how to engage with people. It meant we hired a lot more people that focused on that, which then, was coupled by a second thing. And because we were doing so much leading during COVID remotely, we were depending on people hosting these, neighborhood gatherings. It made us clarify some of our discipleship processes, some pathways we had for both developing disciples and leaders. And that kind of when COVID went away and we all came back, we still had those things that I would look at our leadership development, on a scale of 1 to 10. If we were at a 6 before COVID, we're, somewhere like an 8 or a 9 right now. And so I think that the clarification of the tools, the strategy, and just the importance of disciple making in the process, it almost seemed like, COVID was an awful thing, but this is something God intended for good in the church.
Eric, what roles do you think online and digital strategy should or shouldn't play when it comes to reaching new people?
I know that 2020, a lot of churches went big time digital, right? And then after there was this pushback for physical gatherings, which I'm for sure part of that. For some, they pulled away from digital. I still think digital is really important. It's definitely how people will first check out the church. I meet people all the time who they'll watch online for maybe even longer than I would hope they would watch online before they would attend, physically. So digital for sure, even if you only view it as the foyer before someone enters into a worship service, is important. But also other churches view it, and we would be that way as well, where it's not only like an online brochure that's out there for people to check out your church, but that you can use digital for helping someone engage in other aspects of your church too, or other aspects of your discipleship process. So we view digital not only as an entry point, but to help nudge someone through our entire discipleship process. So we'll do podcasts on content that if I had more time in the sermon, I would have hit. When we do a theology course, we offer it in person and online. When we do a discipleship course called Rooted, we do it in person and online. what we find is a lot of people are toggling back and forth between digital and physical, and that's just more and more normal in their lives. That's how they interact with other organizations. They do some physical, some digital. Obviously, I think physical is beautiful and important, and I preach live a bunch of times every weekend because I love it so much. But I also know that we have people who travel a lot, so I want them to be able to stay in the full rhythm of the church, and to be able to toggle back and forth between physical and digital. So in some ways, digital has a separate strategy, Tony, because it helps onboard. And then in another way, for us, and I know other churches as well, we try to do everything digitally that we also do physically, so that someone can engage through the whole of our church digitally as well, that they can toggle back and forth.
I think there's a consensus in general, right, that people need digital, and some people are maybe not even attending services as frequently. So because of that, I know many large churches are focused also on other strategies that are keeping people, engaged. So what does that look like for you, Adam, in Victory Family?
Yeah, I think for us, and I totally agree with everything. So I don't want anything that I say to seem disparaging of what Eric said, because I agree with every single word, and that's how we try to do it. Some of the things he just said, I'm going to write down and do exactly what he just did, because that's better than what I do. But I love it, and I think for us though, even in that trend, we still want to do our best to fight that trend, because certainly people travel, certainly people are gone, certainly people are sick, but there's also a lot of people that just don't engage often. They attend church when it's convenient for them, and so we want to try to fight those trends as much as humanly possible. Not just give into it. We tell our staff all the time, your goal is to keep people on location 5 minutes longer. We get them 5 minutes longer, keep them 5 minutes longer. We have food trucks on Sundays and outdoor lawn games and inflatables and all kinds of stuff. And it's not to entertain people. It's to build relationship and community among people. If I can get two parents standing watching their kids jump on an inflatable while they're eating a hamburger, they're probably going to have a conversation. So we're trying to do everything we can to get people engaged so they will be on campus more often, but certainly we can't ignore the trends. So like most churches, we try to get every single person in some sort of small group. And what we found is it's impossible. I shouldn't say impossible. It's difficult to get somebody from very large setting to sitting in somebody's living room. And so something that we've done the last couple of years is really try to focus on these mid-sized events, these mid-sized groups. So maybe a Wednesday night, midweek Bible study, where it's still a large setting, but we have everybody at round tables. We'll do it for 12 weeks, and then we'll encourage them to say at the end of this 12 weeks, we met some friends. We would love for you guys to take this one step further in your home and continue a small group. And every small group season, every Wednesday night Bible study season, and we find so many of these guys will go into small groups in their homes. And now with every event that we do, a men's night, a women's night, things like that, there's always going to be a challenge component at the end, like, hey, let's all go through this book of the Bible together, and hey, let's start a Thursday morning, early morning men's group together, or early Bible study for women. And so what we try to do is take all these mid-sized events and these mid-sized groups with the eventual goal of getting everybody into a small group. And I wish I had a ton of space in our church to do. I would do Sunday school. I would do groups all night, every night. But frankly, we still have to use homes as a model. So it's just being very, very, very intentional that everything we do, it's not just to do an event. It's we're trying to get people in community with each other. And something else that we found that's worked really, really well to get people engaged with the church, with each other, and with the community is we try to do at least every other month some sort of serving opportunity. Like a couple of weeks ago, we did a Haiti meal packing event. It was on our campus. We packed 250,000 meals for Haiti, but you have people from all over coming. This weekend, we have a Single Mother's Day of Pampering, where just hundreds of single moms will come in and we'll serve them. And so we're doing stuff like that all the time to get people engaged. Again, they're helping the community, they're finding purpose, but at the same time, they're building relationships with each other. I think, I don't know, Tony will probably remember, Eric certainly would remember. there was a book and it talked about the third place. You guys remember that years, like 20, 25 years ago? And it was like, what's your third place? Home is the first place and your work is the second place. What's your third place? And that's kind of an old strategy, but we still try to feel like to get people engaged in the church and still try to feel like, how do we help this become people's third place where it's not just somewhere that they're at a couple times a week for an hour and a half, but they're engaging with each other and with the community there as often as humanly possible.
Yeah, that's so good. So Shany and Adam have helped us kind of step into the second part of today's conversation, which is about engagement. And it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted these three churches represented in today's conversation, because not only are they experiencing growth with a number of people connected to their church, but they're helping people experience spiritual growth as well. And it's one of the signs of health that we see in growing larger churches, really being intentional about not just connecting people to the church, but then helping people take their next steps towards Jesus. JD, it's one thing to get people connected to a service on Sunday morning. It's another thing to get them engaged in the life of the church. So could you kind of walk us through at the summit? What are the first steps that you're encouraging people to take beyond the Sunday service?
Yeah, I mean, we have your traditional assimilation, type class. It's a 4-week thing. I actually borrow it from Chris Hodges, really, to the model of it, where sort of a rolling thing that people go to that's introducing the church and doctrine and gifts and engagement and all that kind of stuff. But really what I would say, let me go back to what I said earlier about this discipleship pathway. We, laid out 5 identities that we believe encapsulated discipleship, that following Jesus meant that you built your life on these 5 identities. And then what we did is we attached an activity to each of those 5 identities, 1 or 2 activities. Doing these activities is not the sum total of living out this identity, but it's a good first step. The 5 are worshiper, family member, servant, steward, and witness. For worshiper, that's, obviously weekend attendance. It's also developing a daily time with the Lord. We actually have built on our Summit app, it's called Daily Revival. And it's just getting our church to read and pray through the same things together and moving them in that personal worship time. For family member, obviously that's going to be small group. Believers should be belongers, being on volunteer teams and some type of connection outside of just a digital presence or being there on the weekend. The third one, servant, we're going to say that the action step there is going to be to join a ministry service team. Of course, that's not the sum total of what it means to be a servant, but it's a good way of just saying this is a part of my life. And so servant. For steward, we're going to do the traditional time, treasures, and talents, and encouraging people to develop a consistent pattern of giving in ways that they're serving in those others too. And then witness is we do this. We've done it for years. We just call it Who's Your One, where we just have everybody in every small group that has at least one person that they're engaging with, praying for, and doing something to try to bring them to Christ. And so that's going to be after the assimilation class. Those are going to be the things that we're saying, hey, if you'll do this, this is how you can grow in discipleship. It is interesting. And I'll add this last thing is we do a thing every year called a church snapshot. And it's just a anonymous survey we take in the middle of the year. And we just say, no matter who's here, I don't care, like if this is your first time or your 1,000th time, just fill this out and don't put your name on it. And what we found when we do these, 20 or 30 questions to get people to answer is that the number one predictor of whether somebody feels like they're growing spiritually, the number one predictor is not whether they do a quiet time, whether they give, how much they come. It's whether they're not on a volunteer or they're on a volunteer team. And I don't think it's because, helping people park cars leads to amazing spiritual growth, but it just represents a buy-in and a connection. And that if they're connected and they belong, then they end up living out the rest of the parts of discipleship.
Eric, it's interesting related to engagement. This was kind of a buzzword in churches, even pre-pandemic. More and more churches were trying to not just measure attendance, but are people actually engaged? Is that a priority focus for Mariners Church too? If so, how do you define it? And how do you know whether or not you're winning when it comes to engagement once people connect to Mariners?
I always, some of the cliches that people will write about in church world, I always think they're helpful and fun. So I thought that was kind of interesting, engage versus attend. And it was helpful in that I would want to evaluate if we actually are engaging people. But obviously you hope that the people who are attending are engaged, so So I would hope that I don't have people at the church who are I'm just here. I'm attending, but I'm not engaged. So in our mind, we not that we equate the two, but we for sure are going after more than just somebody, being here. We want their heart engaged with the grace of Jesus and the truth of the gospel. For us, Tony, we measure and we really pay attention to if our weekend attendance grows. And I resonate with what Adam says. I'm for any strategy that helps get people plugged into the local church and presents Jesus to them. But just like Adam, the weekend at Mariners is still the way that tends to happen the most in terms of a new person. And so when our weekend attendance and hopefully weekend engagement rises, we also then look, are we seeing engagement in groups rise at the same level, or engaging in volunteerism, or living on mission and serving our local cities? And so if the weekend attendance grows 20% year over year, and the group attendance or the group engagement, if it's not growing at the same level, we call a timeout as a team and say, okay, what do we need to do to be sure that people early in our process know about, to use your language, Tony, which I love, the next step for them. So if in our process, we want to move people from being in the weekend to joining a rooted group, which then becomes their life group, to then knowing how to serve within the church, to then living on mission. And so we evaluate engagement all throughout that process. And if we look at it quarterly, we don't look at it weekly. You would, it just fluctuates too much on a week to week basis. But quarterly, we spend time and really evaluate that. And we're always tweaking. There's always things to do based on what you're learning on what's happening on the macro scale in your church, and then that allows you then to go micro. You don't want to just shepherd the flock. You want to care for each individual sheep. And so the more we know about each person in terms of what they've let us know about them, in terms of what they've, submitted or what information they've given, then we can help nudge an individual, not just watch a macro trend. But the short answer to the question is we measure engagement across our discipleship process, which is follow Jesus, grow together, serve one another, change the world. And so we are preaching people through that process, pulling people through that process, communicating through that process. So we're not just measuring the weekend attendance, we're measuring engagement through the whole.
All right. So here's what's interesting. And all three of these churches reflect this. As we've been learning from large churches at the Unstuck Group in recent years, we've just noticed so many of them are actually using multi-site strategy to continue to extend the reach and impact of their mission throughout their region and in some cases throughout states. And so I guess the last time I looked at the data that we collected in our quarterly report for large churches with more than 1,000 people in attendance, I think it was close to 60% of those churches are engaging multi-site strategy. So it's something that larger churches are leveraging in order to continue to grow the impact of their mission, but also more importantly, just to help people meet and follow Jesus. JD, I've been in ministry 25 years, and 25 years ago, I was hearing, well, this is the end of the mega church. And then the pandemic came, and I heard the same thing again. And more specifically, multi-site mega churches. So I'm curious, how did the pandemic either slow down or fuel what you're thinking about when it comes to multiplication and multi-site?
Yeah, well, by the metrics, it didn't slow us down really at all. I mean, we had to reduce services, for a season like everybody else. But, since it's kind of come back with a lot of strength. For us, multi-site has never been a replacement for church planting. Our goal, as you said at the beginning, is to plant 1,000 churches out of our church. And we sometimes send out our very best leaders, both lay leaders and staff leaders, to go start these churches. Currently of that 1,000, we're on number 580. About 90 of those are domestic. Domestic, we're sending, probably between 30 and 50 of our people out to some city with a couple of leaders, and internationally, about 400 of those internationally, and that's a different strategy. Multisite has never been a way for us of like, we do this or church planning. Multisite, in fact, for us is kind of a road to church planning, because it allows a lot more leaders in smaller environments. I mean, if all 12,000 people at the Summit Church were in one service, there's just a very limited number of spots, especially platform spots. This allows us to just multiply our leaders. It allows us to have the ministry mindset of multiplication. Because campuses are now saying, where's this new part of our city that we can reach with a new campus? Multiplication is not something that you do, that you strategize into one department of your church. It's something that really needs to pervade from top to bottom. Real quick story. I was meeting with my, with one of our elders who leads a small group at one of our campuses, and just lay guy, never been in professional ministry. And he said, my wife and I have been a small group leader at the Summit for 11 years. He said, we've kept a record of everybody in our small group. He said, there's 150 people total that have been in our small group in 11 years. He said, of the 150, 10 are there now. He said, of the remaining 140, one of them just stopped coming, small groups kind of faded away. The other 139 who are no longer in our small group have been sent out by our small group either to help plant a church or to start another small group.
Wow. And
I'm sitting here listening to this guy, and I'm like, this is multiplication. This is something from start to finish. He's thinking multiply. And when you got small groups that multiply and campuses that multiply, then you have churches that multiply. And then we're seeing, I don't believe the mega church era is over, but I do believe it's not the most effective strategy for seeing the nation reached. I have a church of 12,000, so I'm not a mega church hater, but I know that the future belongs to churches that raise up leaders and send them out.
Eric, you have experience leading 2 multi-site churches here in Miami and now in Southern California. Do you feel that the multi-site strategy works on opposite ends of the country with 2 very distinct cultures?
I love the question, and I appreciate you giving me a heads up that you were going to ask me that, because it forced me to think about it beforehand. Because Southern California and South Florida, even though they're both coastal and highly populated, and they're different. Those are distinct cultures. There are some similarities that I think in Christ Fellowship and also at Mariners Church that I think really breathes some meaning and significance into the multiple campus approach in both locations. And I know this is true still at Christ Fellowship because of the leaders that I know there, that I know have a heart for the city and all the different distinct communities in South Florida. And that's definitely true from the church that I serve. I think in both places that I have been a part of leading Multisite, there was a big passion to serve different cities within the city or different communities within the community. And so, I mean, really, when it comes to reaching people, if you're caring about just the number of people you reach, Multisite may not be the best quote unquote ROI. It's expensive compared to just launching another service. I mean, I know, Tony, you know all the OG church consultants back in the day. Lyle Schaller used to say, do 7 services at your facility. And the reality is, if you launch another service, you can do it with not near as much investment as if you go and launch another campus or another congregation. It's just so much more. You'll reach more people in both of those, but just launching more services where you already are is by far financially less expensive to do.
Yeah. In fact, on that note, Eric, you don't know this, but Adam, how many services do you have on Sunday morning at your original location, Adam?
6.
6 services.
I'm not. Y'all are smiling about it. I'm not.
That's respect.
It's not ideal.
I do 6, Adam, as well. I do one Thursday at our broadcast location, one Thursday, 2 Saturday, and three Sunday. So not 6 on Sunday, but 6.
Yeah.
You know,
I would rather do 6 in a row than have to do what you do.
Yeah, I understand.
I'd get them out of the way, man. Boom.
I understand.
All right. Sorry.
I'm glad you did, because it and I would say what Adam's doing is really wise. I mean, in terms of getting the most out of that one facility, you know, I obviously you have to think about how do we care for our team and the volunteers, but as far as just the use of the facility, it's really wise. Now, so why multi-site? And so to answer the question, Miami and Southern California, in both of those contexts, there was a bleeding heart in key leaders that we must be in different parts of the county or different parts of the city. And that conviction is what drove through all of the challenges and struggles. Because there are like, who reports to who? Is there dotted line? What's dotted line? What's hard line? How do we budget? Is it one budget? Is it 7 budgets? You know, what's governance? I mean, there's so many. How do we name this? Is the kids' curriculum the same in every place? I mean, there's so many things that you have to just go through. But if you have a conviction of, we really believe it's actually best for the hearts of the people we shepherd, for them to have a heart for every different segment of our city, for them to feel like their church is caring for different parts of our community. That conviction is what I think just bolsters you to go through all of those multi-site struggles. And that, I do think, transcended both Miami and Southern California.
Adam, I've had the privilege of working with Victory Family Church now for the last number of months. You have 4 locations in and around Norman, Oklahoma. Based on your experience with multi-site, what encouragement would you give to pastors that are watching if they're considering leveraging multi-site strategy and wanting to be most effective in leveraging that strategy to carry out their mission? How would you coach other pastors?
Hey, Tony, and as he answers that, he's got to tell us the times of his 6 services before he answers the question.
He's cheating a little bit because they have 2 rooms, but he's actually preaching all 6 of those messages, though. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
I got to hear it.
So listen, it was a good idea 4 years ago, and in theory. Okay, so practically it hasn't worked out quite as well as I hope. But I just felt like we had a 1,000-seat auditorium, and I felt like instead of making that a big auditorium, I wanted to keep a very small feel. And so we built, instead of expanding that, we built a separate auditorium right next to that auditorium. So I just go back and forth. There's a hallway behind the 2 buildings, and so I just go back and forth. So while worship's going on in one, I preach in the other, and then I get about 7 minutes in between. So we do 8:30 in one, 9:15 in the other, 10, 10:45, 11:30, 1 o'clock.
8:30, 9:15,
10, 10:45, 11:30, 1.
That's fascinating. So those, how does that work? I'm sorry, Tony, I'm hijacking. I'm just so curious.
No. Yeah, now that I mention it, I bet everybody watching is curious to know how it works too. So go ahead.
And I do think it's helpful because there are churches that have extra rooms. Like we have an extra room, but I think we would run out of space in parking and in kids ministry. So how does that work with kids ministry? You know, being able to drop a kid off when the other people drop their kid off 30 minutes before.
Yeah, it doesn't. So. One, you have to overbuild parking. So that was something that we did from the get-go, is we knew we were going to do this. We overbuilt parking. But essentially, it's 2 campuses on the same property. And so let's just say the 8:30. If you go to the 8:30, your kids go to the west wing of the church, west kids wing of the church. If you go to 9:15, it is your kids go to the east wing of the church. So the only thing that is the same is me. It's different worship teams, different kids teams. So all of them, it literally runs like 2 separate campuses on the same property. I'm just walking back and forth.
Props.
Now you know why Adam struggles to get guest speakers to come speak at his church now, though.
I'll come speak for you, man. I can say I knocked out 2 speaking engagements in one stone. 2 birds in one stone.
You're in. All right, you tell me a date. You're in.
All right, so let's get back to my question here. I feel like I've lost control of this whole webinar.
Better rein it in.
Yeah, Adam, what coaching would you give to pastors if they're wanting to be most effective when it comes to their multi-site strategy?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple things real quick. First of all, just be patient. I think it's the thing to do. And I think years ago, it seemed like everybody asked you, how big is your church? Now people want to ask you, how many campuses you have? Almost like it's a status symbol, which is really, really, both questions are very silly. But I think be patient, make sure you're actually ready to do it. And I would really have, and say to a pastor that's thinking about it, have somebody from the outside come engage the health of your church. Somebody like the Unstuck Group. Is your staff healthy? Is your leadership healthy? If you're a senior leader, are you healthy as a person? Is your marriage healthy? Because like in a marriage, if your marriage is not healthy and you somehow think having a child is going to bring you together and all of a sudden your marriage problems are going to be fixed, like, you're an idiot, right? So it's just going to make it worse. And so if the original campus, sending campus, whatever, broadcast, whatever you call it, if that's not very healthy, then I would say absolutely do not start anything until you make sure that the sending campus is healthy. One thing that we've done that I think has been effective is we spend a year in the community that we're going to, serving that community before we ever try to do any sort of marketing, advertising, or launch a campus. We want to make sure they know, like, man, we're here to serve you. We're here to help you. We're going to get involved in the local nonprofits. We're going to get involved in the school systems. We don't let people know, hey, we're not just going to try to bring this thing in and everybody come to us. We want them to know, like, we actually love you. We want to invest our resources and our people into this community on the front end. And then I would say launch as big as you can. Most people would say if you're launching within 15, 20 minutes of whatever sending campus you would be at, you're going to lose half those people in 18 months. So if you feel like we need 400 people to be sustainable, I would say you need to figure out how to launch with at least 600, because 300 are going to leave. Certainly you can grow another 100 people in that 18 months, but I would say launch really, really, really big so you can stay healthy. And then one thing I've seen a lot, I think there has to be unique value at every campus. And I think we want to say as pastors, I can cast vision and I can get people to go to this elementary school or this movie theater, and you probably can, but if the kids' ministry is dirty, they're not going to stay. And so there has to be the same, you're not going to have the bells and whistles, but you have to have the same values and the same excellence and the same quality at every location, or they'll just drive right past you to go to the original or the sending. So I do think every campus, it has to be very good. It has to, again, not the bells and whistles, don't have to have all the cool stuff, but it's got to be the same excellence.
Well, that leads us then to our last conversation for today, which is around staffing and structure. And the reason why I wanted to include this is, well, first of all, it's hard to believe next month we're going to be celebrating 15 years at the Unstuck Group of serving churches. And what I've noticed through those years is you can help a church get the best ministry strategy in place to reach new people, to help people cross the line of faith and continue to take steps towards Christ. You can have the best strategy, but if the structure isn't there, and if you don't have the right people in the right roles, it's really hard to move that strategy forward, especially in the season where we're hearing from so many churches this challenge around finding good next-gen leaders to step into key leadership roles. Eric, well, first of all, your book on Design to Lead, I think if pastors haven't read that yet, a great resource as we're thinking about raising up next generation of leaders. But Eric, we consistently hear from pastors that leadership development is a high priority that often gets them stuck, though, because they're not intentional in that area, they're not seeing success in that area. So how are you approaching leadership development at Mariners right now?
It's a value for us. It falls into our strategy as a whole. So I mentioned, follow Jesus, grow together, serve one another. So within serve one another, we have a leadership pipeline that we keep in front of our team. It's not something I ever pass out when I preach. So you would have to think about it as the operating system that's behind the scenes. But we evaluate how we are doing that, helping people who want to grow in their leadership progress. It's not ever meant to be, someone has to move from a volunteer to a senior coach for that. They may love being a volunteer, but for those who want to grow in their development, our pipeline, and it's really similar from what you would see in the book Designed to Lead. We try to help people move from being a volunteer to a leader to a coach to a senior coach. And those are all volunteer roles. So we have layers of leadership within our volunteer structure. And then within our staff structure, we have layers of leadership. And then you just really think about, how are we going to develop people in what we've decided are the key competencies for leaders at our church. And then you just match that together, the competencies and the layers of leadership. How do you drive this competency down, this competency down, this competency down? People get wigged out sometimes when they hear leadership pipeline because it sounds so overwhelming, sounds nerdy, sounds like you got to be an engineer. What is this thing? The reality is you already have the components at your church for leadership pipeline, in that you have layers of leadership. Maybe you aren't using the same nomenclature, and they're called one thing in kids and another thing in youth and another thing in groups. And it'd be helpful if you had the same nomenclature. And you probably already have competencies, things that you've decided. We really want all of the leaders at our church to be this type of disciple, to have this servant's posture, to be able to do this thing, whatever the competencies are. So it's just taking some time and whiteboarding that out and drawing up a play. You won't execute the play perfectly, but at least you'll have a play. You have a play drawn up on here's how we're gonna make leaders.
Now, Adam, overstaffing and staff in the wrong roles have been some of the most pressing things that we've been hearing from churches of why they're reaching out to us. And so, how do you make sure that you get the right leaders in the right roles, and then while you're also maintaining a lean and healthy staffing model?
That's a really easy answer. Hire the Unstuck Group, and then just make them do it for you. So no, but I mean, there is Tony didn't tell me to say that or anything, but there is a level of, I was like, the church was growing, but there was a lot of elements of the staff that was just very stuck. Not only bad people, it's just like our structure just wasn't very good, and having Tony come in and really help restructure the organization and just looking at people and helping me see things I couldn't see, actually wildly helpful. And we've all heard, be slow to hire, quick to fire. You hear that, but so many times we just get impatient, and I think we've got to play the long game. We've got to be slow. Let's say, and even in the interview process, make it slow, long, very relational. Everybody hits a home run in an actual interview, but hang out with them. We have it's not really a saying, but we always say when we hire somebody, would you want them in your boat? And we used to do a staff retreat at a lake, and so we're on boats just chilling for 8 hours a day. And so it's one thing to want somebody on your staff. It's another thing to want somebody to be in a boat with you on a lake for 8 hours.
That's
so
good.
If we don't want somebody in our boat, they could be incredibly capable, and it doesn't have to all be in my boat, but anybody can say, man, I would love to have them on my boat. Like, then it's one of the green lights for us. And so we want to make sure that just culturally they're really bought in, and they're bought into the vision and the mission, which is all, man, everybody knows all that. Just sometimes we see something and think, it'll work, I'll fix it. And it's just, it never does. If you try to go outside of your values. And I think for us, it's constant communication. One thing's been healthy, about twice a year, I'll email the staff, and I'll say, man, if you don't like your role and you want to shift positions, then I want to talk to you. And you can't do that and then fire them if they come and say they don't like their role. So it's got to be honest, But there's been some people that they've come in and I said, I don't have that. And so if you want to stay in your role, you can. And some of them have said I don't, and they move on. Others have been able to shift. And so this has been healthy. I think for us, it's just always having a really healthy, open, honest communication, seeing where people are at, seeing where they're frustrated, and frankly, helping people move on. Not in like the tongue-in-cheek type of way, like we're transitioning people. That's what we say, right? But really actually saying, man, if you don't like it here, I will help you try to find the greatest job on the planet. And I think your people know, like, man, they love me and they want what's best for me, and trying to find that. I think it's really, really healthy. And I'm a big fan of being best friends with all of your staff. We have right at 70 on our staff now, and obviously I can't be best friends with all of them, but I want to be as close as humanly possible as I can. So we spend a ton of time, and I think knowing people, knowing their families, knowing their pet peeves, it's helpful, and it's helpful to know them as people, like really, really well, to be able to make sure they're in the right spot and they're in a spot that they're passionate about, and frankly, they're capable of doing a really good job.
JD, one of the common challenges we're hearing from pastors in this season is how difficult it is to raise up and actually engage young leaders in the ministry. So I'm curious to hear, how are you doing that at the summit? And has your strategy shifted at all through the years?
Yeah, I mean, our church has always been fairly young just because we have a Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, all the other city names you want to put in along with us. It's just a very, more college students in this area than just about any other place in the country. And so it's always leaned a little young. There are certain things that we've, we are a Southern Baptist church, and I wouldn't say Southern Baptist is the leading attractive thing for somebody in their 20s, the reputation associated with it. So, really prioritizing the gospel above all, and saying that, this is what it means to understand and follow the Great Commission. These are the cultural trappings that we have to, the church and the gospel is bigger than that. But I'll say, Tony, it has not been our experience that the way that you do that with young leaders is by backing off of difficult truths. I'm not a sociologist. I'll say that, right up front, but I feel like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was just getting started in ministry, kind of Bill Clinton's don't ask, don't tell era when it comes to some of the most difficult questions. Hey, that's awkward. I won't bring it up if you won't bring it up. Man, when college students, young professionals, when they come in, they already know that as an evangelical church, they understand we're the whole ball of crazy. And so, getting ahead of that and saying like, hey, this is what that means. Here's what it doesn't mean. Jesus was filled with grace and truth, not like half of each, but grace and truth, full of them. Grace came before truth. Truth without grace is fundamentalism, and it kills. Grace without truth is sentimentality, and it also kills. But being full of both of them is how we found that you engage young leaders. You might have been asking more of a methodological question, and I gave you sort of a gospel answer. I didn't mean that. So if you want to, if I need to give a different answer, that's fine. But that was my first gut response.
All right. On that note, I just want to thank again our panelists, Adam, Eric, JD, for joining us for today's conversation. Thanks for bringing all of that hope and encouragement for us as we're considering our next steps in our leadership and our ministry at our churches. So thank you guys. Shany, you did a fabulous job. So thanks for stepping in for Amy today. And thank you for joining us for today's conversation. And gosh, if there's anything that we can be doing to help you move your mission forward at your churches, help you take a step forward in your leadership as you pastor your churches, don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's what we do, and we've been doing for almost 15 years now, so we would love to serve you and to serve your churches. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on one of our upcoming webinars.